The biggest and most common mistake I see in pull-ups that's killing your shoulder health and your gains is that people squeeze their shoulder blades down and back, and they think that this is good for their pull-up, but really it's counterproductive to what most people want to get out of a pull-up. Pay attention to how Jacob's scapula moves and how much it moves when he does this down and back squeeze of his shoulder blades. Let's just observe that for a second. Okay, so naturally as we go through a pull-up, we should see some degree of upward rotation as we go down and downward rotation as we come up. Now, if Jacob frees his scap and allows it to actually move, let's see what happens. Notice how much more range of motion he's getting. This is him using muscles like his lats and his traps, his mid traps and lower traps to actually take his scap through a full range of motion. This is what we want. This is better for hypertrophy. The problem with shoulders back and down is that they're compromising the proper mechanics that should happen between the shoulder blade scapula and the arm, the humerus, as we move through what we call shoulder flexion to shoulder extension. As we move our arm overhead, there should be a natural upward rotation of the scapula that occurs as the humerus moves into external rotation. As we move down, what we should see is the scapula naturally goes into what we call downward rotation, and the humerus moves into more internal rotation. With that in mind, why would we try to pre-shorten the muscles that take the scapula into that downwardly rotated position? Why would we try to limit their ability to move through that full range of motion? So there's two main problems. The first mechanically is if we're not allowing for that proper coupled motion between the scapula and the humerus, we're going to rely on a lot more humeral movement than we're going to get relative to the scapula. And that is going to create a lot of impingement of the what we call subacromial space within the shoulder. That is going to lead to an increased risk of impingement within the shoulder where things get blocked and then bones hit other bones. And it's going to force other muscles to compensate to get the arm overhead because the scapula won't let it. The second problem is that it's not even allowing us to fully use the muscles we're trying to use in a pull-up or a row. Notice how that when Jacob squeezes his shoulders down and back, his rib cage extends and his ribs flare. This is putting his scapula in a disadvantageous position to create that rotation, but it's also pre-shortening those muscles like his traps and his lats. If you look at the normal human spine curve, we have some degree of arching here, rounding here at the upper back, and then again another little arch right here. This S-shaped curve is very important, and we need some degree of this right here because the scapula is this structure that is a little bit rounded in of itself, so that way it can rest on a rounded rib cage to allow for that nice gliding and upward and downward rotation. If we are extended at our rib cage, that is going to compromise that position, and that is going to limit those scapular mechanics. So the answer is to not worry about your scaps too much. If you're moving through your arms, particularly your elbows, as I'll talk about in a second correctly, your scaps will naturally take care of themselves in many cases. So instead of thinking shoulders back, think elbows down to your sides. Think about trying to drag your elbows down into your low back almost. And that is going to allow you to get that nice coupling of the humerus and the scapula, and you don't have to worry about what's going on here. It'll naturally take care of itself. And the last thing is making sure that your rib cage isn't excessively flaring. So in order to prevent that, you can keep your feet slightly out in front of you, and that will allow you to keep your head stacked over your rib cage and hips to allow these muscles to work optimally. And also what you could do is you could just use an underhand grip. That would change the mechanics of it a little bit, but it would also allow you to stay relatively less extended through there.